Many of these sites are treated by their flag states as sovereign state property, and some are protected as military remains or war graves. But those legal boundaries are invisible to the heavy industrial equipment now tearing them apart. The resting places of thousands of sailors from some of the most famous naval battles in history are not rusting away in peace. They are being violently smashed, ripped open, and hauled to the surface. At one Force Z site, recent salvage has been linked to oil pollution. At another, surveys documented exposed ammunition and scattered propellant. Farther south, one cruiser's main wreck structure has effectively vanished from the ocean floor. The sites are internationally recognized war graves covered by a legal doctrine that says they belong to their flag nations forever. But out on the water, the reality is entirely different. Massive commercial barges equipped with giant mechanical claws are currently destroying World War II warships and melting them down into the global supply chain. The question is how commercial salvagers can illegally steal entire warships without the world's most powerful navies intervening to stop them. A massive Chinese grab dredger known as the Chuan Hong 68 was recently documented operating heavy salvage equipment off the coast of Malaysia. Its movements connected it to the wrecks of both HMS Repulse and HMS Prince of Wales, and one of the main targets below was a legendary British battleship. The ocean floor around the wreck has been reported to contain scattered ammunition and exposed cordite, creating a dangerous site for divers and investigators. This is the remains of HMS Prince of Wales. The massive vessel was sunk by Japanese bombers on December 10, 1941, taking hundreds of men to the bottom. It was one of the most advanced battleships in the Royal Navy, and its sudden destruction signaled the end of the battleship era. Today, the wreck is heavily torn open. The thick armor plating has been peeled back, and the internal magazines have been violently smashed. One explanation often repeated for the targeting of World War II wrecks is a metallurgical phenomenon known as low background steel. Steel made before the nuclear age can have lower levels of certain radioactive contamination, and in very specialized scientific settings that can matter. But for modern wreck looters, the stronger and more direct motive is usually simpler. Large quantities of recoverable scrap metal, including steel, copper alloys, and bronze, sitting on an unguarded seabed. To harvest this premium material, massive industrial barges position themselves over the wreck and drop heavy mechanical claws into the water, blindly ripping at the hull. This kind of violent salvage damage appears to have compromised parts of the wreck and exposed material that had been sealed inside the ship for decades. The result is a site where scattered ammunition and propellant create real hazards for divers, investigators, and any official survey team trying to document the damage. Those hazards slow legitimate archaeology, but they have not stopped commercial salvage barges from returning to the site. The British government has repeatedly protested the desecration of the site, but the practical legal problem is that the wreck lies in waters off Malaysia, outside British control. The United Kingdom treats the sunken ship as Crown property, but it does not control the sea area around it. The British military cannot simply place permanent guards over a wreck in another state's maritime zone without cooperation from the coastal authorities. Those authorities may have legal powers in the area, but they do not have unlimited ships, crews, or surveillance capacity to guard a submerged wreck 24 hours a day. The scavengers know this jurisdictional boundary perfectly well, so they turn off their tracking transponders, disguise their operations, and operate entirely in the blind spots of international maritime enforcement. The scavengers did not just scatter the ammunition of the British battleship because on the neighboring wreck they began cutting away the heaviest sections of the ship itself. A 794-foot battlecruiser lies on the seafloor nearby, but the massive steel hull abruptly ends in the darkness. The entire stern section of the ship is completely missing. This is His Majesty's ship Repulse, the World War I era battlecruiser that accompanied the Prince of Wales as part of Force Z. It was a highly decorated veteran ship that survived the First World War only to be lost to the same Japanese air attack on that December day in 1941. Today, reports indicate that the wreck has lost its stern and other high-value sections. The scavengers operating over this wreck were not just taking ordinary scrap steel. They appear to have targeted heavy, non-ferrous metals, including bronze and copper alloys, for their immediate scrap value. To reach those valuable materials, salvagers removed heavy sections from the stern and surrounding structure. This brutal extraction left the rest of the truncated hull entirely exposed to the strong ocean currents, rapidly accelerating the physical degradation of the remaining war grave. By removing such a large section of the wreck, the scavengers may also have made the remaining structure more vulnerable to currents, seabed movement, and long-term collapse. The British government expressed profound outrage at the systematic dismantling of the Repulse, citing its sacred status as a final resting place for the crew. However, diplomatic protest moves far more slowly than industrial salvage. Even when ownership is clear, enforcement still depends on detection, evidence, local action, and cooperation between governments. That delay buys the salvage barges the exact thing they need most to operate, which is time. By the time diplomatic notes are exchanged between embassies and local patrol boats are finally dispatched to the remote coordinates, the massive commercial barges have already hauled up hundreds of tons of metal and disappeared over the horizon. Missing metal is a historical tragedy, but ripping off hull plates can trigger an active environmental disaster. While the British wrecks were stripped of their bronze, an American cruiser further south was stripped so violently that the wreckage began bleeding directly into the ocean. In the Sunda Strait, divers found something different but just as alarming: unauthorized and systematic disturbance of a rusted steel hull, including removed rivets, missing metal plating, and signs of recent intrusion. This is USS Houston, an American heavy cruiser famous as the galloping ghost of the Java coast. The ship was President Franklin Roosevelt's favorite warship and served as the flagship of the Asiatic Fleet. It was sunk in a chaotic, close-quarters night action during the Battle of Sunda Strait on March 1, 1942. Today, the wreck is not resting peacefully in the dark water. It is actively leaking oil into the surrounding environment because scavengers have forcefully removed structural rivets and heavy steel plates from the hull. The ship rests in relatively shallow water, making it incredibly vulnerable to modern maritime equipment. Unlike wrecks in the deep ocean, the Houston can be reached easily by commercial divers and surface-operated grabbers. In 2014, a United States Navy mobile diving and salvage unit conducted a detailed survey of the wreck and documented fresh, unauthorized removal of the metal plating. The salvagers do not care about the structural integrity of the ship. Their mechanism of metal extraction relies on pure destabilization. By removing rivets and metal plating, they weaken the wreck and increase the risk of exposing spaces that have remained closed for decades. On a warship that once carried heavy fuel oil, any new opening, collapse, or intrusion can become an environmental concern, even when the exact path of contamination is not yet proven. This creates an entirely new legal and environmental boundary. The illegal salvage has transformed a stable, legally protected war grave into an active pollution hazard in a highly trafficked maritime choke point. The United States Navy considers the wreck sovereign territory in perpetuity, meaning no one is allowed to touch it without explicit permission from the American government. But the shallow depth and the close proximity to busy commercial shipping lanes allow rogue barges to blend in seamlessly with everyday maritime traffic. They drop anchor, rip a few plates loose, pull up the steel, and retreat before authorities can verify their activities on radar. The Houston lost several outer plates to these rapid strike operations, but an Australian cruiser sunk in the exact same battle has suffered a much more violent fate. A damaged bow section rests on the seafloor with major elements of the ship's structure and armament missing. They have not simply fallen away with age. The scale of the loss points to deliberate industrial salvage. This is His Majesty's Australian ship Perth, a light cruiser resting near the Houston. It was lost alongside the American ship in the Battle of Sunda Strait on the 1st of March, 1942. The Perth is one of Australia's most revered naval losses, holding immense cultural and memorial weight for the nation. Today, marine surveys estimate that roughly 60% of the surviving structure has been removed, including portions of the hull, superstructure, and armament. The remaining wreck is not simply damaged by time, it has been stripped by human hands and heavy machinery. The sheer volume of missing metal proves the physical boundary of this crime. This level of destruction points not to souvenir divers with hand tools, but to industrial-scale salvage. The damage is consistent with industrial salvage methods documented across the region: crane barges, mechanical grabs, cutting tools, and in some cases heavy drop chisel equipment used to break wreckage before recovery. What matters here is not the exact tool in every blow, but the scale. Machinery powerful enough to remove plating, armament, and whole sections of a protected wreck. This extreme physical force proves that these are heavily capitalized industrial operations. They are systematically destroying a sovereign wargrave using extreme mechanical brutality, operating in enforcement blind spots where local authorities cannot or do not intervene in time. The Australian government has funded extensive underwater surveys to document the damage, sending dive teams to map the shattered remains of the once proud ship. But documenting the destruction on the seafloor is not the same as stopping the barges on the surface. The thieves took more than half of the Perth, but a few hundred miles away they accomplished something far more terrifying. They made an entire heavy cruiser completely disappear. A multinational expedition mapping the Java Sea deployed advanced multibeam sonar over a known wreck site, only to find a 500-foot-long, ship-shaped indentation in the muddy seabed. There was no steel, no superstructure, no armor, and no guns. A massive British heavy cruiser had been completely and entirely erased from the ocean floor. This was the resting place of His Majesty's ship Exeter, a 10,500-ton warship. She was a legendary vessel that had previously helped defeat the German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee at the River Plate, before being reassigned to the Pacific Theater. The Exeter was sunk during the Second Battle of the Java Sea on the 1st of March, 1942. Today, the main wreck structure is effectively gone. The physical removal of a 10,500-ton steel structure is a staggering mechanical impossibility for a small-time operation. It requires months of continuous, highly visible industrial operations. Massive crane barges would have had to anchor over the exact coordinates, repeatedly dropping their 5-ton chisels and hauling up jagged steel day after day in open water. The fact that an operation of this incredible magnitude could be carried out from start to finish without any naval intervention exposes a catastrophic failure of international maritime enforcement. The 2016 survey that found the empty trench proved that a legal doctrine cannot physically stop a commercial salvage fleet. The sovereign immunity that protects these ships is a legal concept designed to ensure that a sunken warship remains the property of its flag state unless that state clearly abandons it. It is meant to protect the ship, the site, and the dead, but physically the human remains associated with Exeter could not be protected by legal doctrine alone. Archaeological reporting noted exposed human remains on the seabed, and later investigative accounts alleged that remains disturbed during salvage were mishandled ashore. Those allegations are deeply disturbing, but without a full official forensic accounting, the safest wording is that the dead were exposed, disturbed, and denied the protection the law was supposed to provide. The main wreck structure was hauled away for scrap, leaving behind a scar in the seabed and a historical crime scene that can never be fully restored. The massive warship that fought in 2 oceans was ultimately completely destroyed by commercial greed. International law, sovereign immunity, and sacred wargrave designations are entirely invisible on the seafloor. They are powerful concepts in a courtroom, but they cannot stop a 5-ton steel chisel falling through the dark water. The haunting sonar image of the seabed void where the Exeter used to be is an empty trench proving a very difficult reality. If a government cannot physically guard a wreck, it cannot protect it from the modern industrial world. These 5 ships prove that the story of a warship does not end the moment it slips beneath the surface. If it contains valuable scrap metal, heavy non-ferrous alloys, or simply enough steel to make the risk worthwhile, it can be hunted again. Without constant physical enforcement, history is slowly being dredged up, melted down, and sold. If there is another sunken warship you want me to investigate, leave its name in the comments.